What happened to Earl McNeil? That's what activists and his family are still asking officials nearly 3 months after his deadly encounter with National City Police. Some South Bay beaches are continuously fouled with sewage flowing north from Tijuana. Coastal cities are suing the federal government to do something about it. And hundreds of newspapers stand up in editorials to President Trump's constant attacks on journalists and a free press. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, KPBS reporter Jade Hindman, reporter Joshua Emerson Smith of the San Diego Union-Tribune, KPBS environment reporter Eric Anderson, and Matt Hall, editorial and opinion director for the Union-Tribune. Well, the in-your-face confrontations over the death of Earl McNeil in the custody of National City Police have died down for the moment. Yet it's going on 3 months since McNeil's deadly encounter, and his autopsy and other evidence in the case, including police video, remained sealed. So, Jade, who's the controlling authority now, and what are they saying?
Well, right now, the police have filed their report. They're finished with their investigation. It's in the hands of the district attorney now. And so their office is looking into it to see if there's any criminal wrongdoing in the case. Okay, and of course, that all remains under wraps right now, and that's kind of the thing that's frustrating so many people in National City. Right. It's under wraps. The investigation is sealed, so even though the autopsy is finished, the medical examiner's report is finished, even though there is video, there's also audio, none of that is being released, and so it's been frustrating for people in National City, as well as the family who is asking questions about bruising that's on Earl McNeil's face, his arms, his legs. They're saying, you know, all of that is under investigation, and they just haven't gotten a whole lot of information about it. Okay, and a police citizens review board meeting last night in National City, that didn't ease the frustrations for people much, did it? No, it did not. So, you know, this board out there, they won't actually get a glance at this internal investigation until like a year from now. So it will be some time before they can look into it. They had nothing to offer in way of that. But while the community is asking for this board to be transparent and accountable, yesterday they were trying to nail down a meeting time to have consistency. So this is a board that's, you know, it's got 6 members. It's supposed to have 8 members. They've got a lot of things to figure out between now and when they actually start to look at this investigation. Eric?
Well, I know that they have a lot of video available in this case. What are the chances that the family might get a look at that video at least, and the public perhaps at most? What are the chances that might happen? Well, you know, the chances as of right now are slim. And this is why, because the National City is looking at this, and they are trying to gird themselves and protect themselves from any litigation that may result from it. So they're not releasing any of that information. They say they just don't want it to jeopardize their investigation. Now, why would that be an issue after the chief has already said that this was a clean-cut situation, that protocol was followed, no rules were broken here? That's the question that's on a lot of people's minds. And remind us briefly what happened in this incident. What was the circumstance? So back in May, Earl McNeil showed up at the police station, used the phone right outside of that front door, and wanted to speak with someone. They said that he was combative and erratic. They arrested him on suspicion of having drugs. Under the influence. Exactly. And so they did that. They put him in a device called a wrap. And at that point, there were just a lot of holes in the story as to when, you know, they transported him to the jail. How long did that take? At some point, he stopped breathing. His heart stopped. He was resuscitated and taken to the hospital. He died several days later. But what happened during that altercation? And KPBS published a timeline about this whole case here. There is some time unaccounted for. Tell us about that. The whole altercation is unaccounted for. This phone call happened at 5:26 a.m. Back in May. And we don't know how long it took officers to get out there and respond. We don't know how long Earl stayed in the wrap device. We don't know how long it took for him to be transported to the jail where he was denied intake. After that, we don't know how long it took for him to get into the ambulance and to the hospital. There are a lot of unknowns in this. And isn't it right that there's presumably body camera video out there? There's surveillance video?
There's
he was
surveillance,
outside of a police station.
Exactly. There is surveillance video of that altercation. There's also video outside of the jail, the intake area there. So everything has been on camera. What we did learn from the family in terms of this timeline, they did meet with the sheriff's office early this week. They believe that he was in that wrap for at least 2 hours and unattended. So that's something that they're trying to get confirmed.
And the family's response on this to what had happened was that he had a troubled history, right?
Right. I mean, he had a history of bipolar disorder. They believe he may have at some time self-medicated. And so all of this could have factored in. And so another big question in this is why was the PERT team not called into this? They don't know for sure
what they would have done.
Now, those are the trained experts. They're trained to deal with people who have mental illness, right? Because
interacting out on the street.
Sure. They've been specially trained to do this, and they're supposed to be called in anytime law enforcement is going to have an interaction with someone who may be mentally ill or whom they suspect to be. In this case, the family has not gotten concrete answers from National City Police if, in fact, the PERT team was called in.
Okay. How frustrating is this? I mean, you're talking. The word questions was the single worst word that we just talked about in this conversation. Frustrations as well. You know who's got frustrations outside of National City and the family? The San Diego Union Tribune editorial board, which a couple weeks ago said, this is ridiculous, get this information out there. The timeline you guys are talking about, you probably don't want to toot your own horns too much. I will. That's an excellent piece of journalism. The digital presentation is amazing. What's most amazing is that all of the times, to your point, of all this digital information that's out there, all these video surveillance cameras, body cams, KPBS and other journalists have asked for this information and not been provided it. I mean, there's too many questions for the PD and for National City to sit on this information. They got to kick it out.
And your editorial said it's time for transparency. I mean, it's been a long time. It's pretty unusual to go this long, right?
And look, there's other police departments in other cities in this state that have had shootings and other deadly situations where they have released that information. It's a balancing act, and you got to protect a lot of different factors in these situations. But I mean, come on, it's time to see that video and see what it shows.
All right, couple seconds left on this segment. We talked before on the show about, as I said, the open, in-your-face demonstrations, the activists. Sure. Is that kind of died down? Is that on pause for now, or?
They are going to continue to demonstrate and raise their voices. There's not another city council meeting right now. They're on recess, so they won't come back until November, October, sometime around there. But there are plans to continue to push for transparency and accountability.
Okay, and by then, hopefully, at least we'll see some sort of report and some action from the district attorney's office on the transparency. Well, we are going to move on. Sewage from Tijuana often fouls beaches north of the border. For most of us, it's an abstract idea in news stories. But for Serge Dedina, mayor of Imperial Beach, the issue is personal. He explained amid a hearing in federal court this week.
It's a very emotional morning for me. Vivid memories of taking my kids to the emergency room. We have little kids here. Our kids are getting sick. Our lifeguard's getting sick. And it's been a long road and a really tough fight, and it really meant a lot to me that our members of our community were here to support that.
So, Eric, obviously very emotional in that interview this week. Start with what this hearing was about.
The hearing was basically Judge Jeffrey Miller listening to the Justice Department make the case for having the lawsuit dismissed. Two cities, the city of Imperial Beach, Chula Vista, and the Port of San Diego, sued the federal government, saying it's time to stop this cross-border pollution problem. They sued not only the federal government, the International Boundary and Water Commission, but also the civilian contractor who runs the International Sewage Treatment Plant. And they said, look, it's time to stop this. The federal government is allowing this to go on. And the federal government says, we didn't really cause the pollution. This is the case that they made in the hearing. We really didn't cause the pollution. It's not really our fault, so we shouldn't be held liable for it. And they were asking to have that suit dismissed. The Judge Jeffrey Miller said he wanted to go down there and look at that. He didn't need to do that for this dismissal motion, but it seemed to hint that this was going to move for a period of time beyond that motion. So maybe that was an indication that he might keep this lawsuit active.
So, Joshua, what is the federal argument? I mean, it seems to me if you have an international border agency, this is an international border problem and a big problem down there in South Bay. How do you say it's not on your watch?
Well, basically what Imperial Beach and Chula Vista and the port are asking is for the federal government to beef up the infrastructure that they have along the border that diverts the sewage as it flows across the border from Tijuana into San Diego. And they do that. The federal government already does that. In the 90s, they built an international wastewater treatment plant down along the border where a lot of the sewage is diverted to, and then it gets treated and then kicked out into the ocean. They have collectors in the canyons along the border in the Tijuana River Valley, and they have pumps on the Tijuana River itself. The question is, are they doing enough? Because a lot of this pollution, the water pollution, the sewage, anytime it rains, basically, it bypasses the pumps and the collectors and flows right into San Diego. And what Imperial Beach and Chula Vista and the port are saying is the pollution hits your infrastructure and then passes it, and so that is technically a discharge on behalf of the International Boundary and Water Commission, which amounts to a violation of the Clean Water Act. The federal government says, no, we do our best, we actually make the situation better. Just because it touches our equipment and then moves on and we're not able to capture all of it, doesn't mean that we necessarily should be held responsible for all of the pollution that happens.
Sounds like they want to get more pumps and make Mexico pay for it. How much are we talking about here? If they really wanted to do a full court press on terms of controlling this pollution and this flow, how many billions, I imagine, are we talking?
Well, keep it in perspective, okay? This is a multi-decadal problem. The International Wastewater Treatment Plant that's there now, which can treat, I think it's 25 million gallons or 50 million gallons of sewage a day, it was put there because of the threat of legal action, right? The agency that oversees that area, the International Boundary and Water Commission, was created as a part of NAFTA to deal specifically with pollution problems and water issues that occur near the U.S. borders. The reason that the International Wastewater Treatment Plant there has secondary treatment now is because of the threat of legal action. For a while, they were one of only 2 sewage plants in the country that were expelling sewage that was not treated to clean water standards that met the federal Clean Water
stuff,
Act. The Point Loma plant, incidentally, is the other one that does that. But they do it with a waiver. The International Boundary Water Commission plant never had that waiver. Activists threatened to sue. They did add some sewage treatment ponds to raise the level of treatment of the water that they do treat. The issue here is that the Tijuana sewage system is so inadequate at this point because the population has boomed there that it's not capable of handling all the sewage that's generated there. And when you have a rain event, Mexico essentially turns its collection system off because it would overwhelm their Punta Banda plant just a little bit south of Playas Tijuana. They turn it off, and then all that stuff comes into the United States. It overwhelms the collection systems, which were designed as dry water systems, dry water capture systems, or dry weather capture systems. It just overwhelms that, runs in through the estuary and out into the ocean and fouls the ocean water.
And how bad are we talking about here, Joshua?
Well, it could be bad, as we remember in February 2017 when a pipe burst in the Tijuana River. We had effluent all the way up to Chula Vista, right? So, I mean, it can be bad. And Imperial Beach, which technically includes the Tijuana sloughs, they have beaches shut down, a third of the year on average. So, you have and then it's not just when the beaches are shut down, but it's also the perception for a place like Imperial Beach. You say, where are we going to go to the beach this weekend? Should we go to the Silver Strand or down to Imperial Beach? And we were just going down, we were just having that discussion, my wife and I were having that discussion the other day, and she said, well, let's not go to Imperial Beach because don't they have sewage down there? And I was like, well, there's not sewage every day, right? But that perception is really bad for tourism, and it does make people sick from time to time.
I mean, 1 out of 3, that's stunning.
It's
right?
stunning.
It's stunning. And that's why you see Serge Dedina choked up because of his family history. I mean, kudos to him for, we just had this discussion. I bet a lot of listeners' kind of ears are glooping up because it's so technical, it's so complex, it involves so many government agencies. It is a very tough nut to crack. We've been trying to get people to pay attention to this for a long time as an editorial board as well. I know Joshua's written a ton of stories. KPBS, again, doing good work. This is another example of journalism banging a drum, but people aren't really paying attention. You know what I mean?
Well, one thing, too, in the 2017 spill, the stench from that spill was so bad that some people in the city of Imperial Beach felt that they couldn't leave their homes because they thought it was hurting their health. And when the stench of sewage gets that thick, I mean, I think that really motivated the mayor of Imperial Beach to get out there and try to get something done.
Well, that's a good point, right? Because this is not a new problem. It may be getting worse as Mexico gets more and more built up, as Tijuana gets more and more development, but it's not new. And Serge Dedina basically made a decision to go full court press on this and become super public, right? Like in Coronado, they like to be very quiet about this problem, right?
And
they don't like to talk about it
because it occasionally gets that.
Because it occasionally gets up there. But Serge Dedina basically made a decision following that 2017 spill to be very loud about this issue. And now the result of that is we're in federal court over this, which is probably the biggest development that we've seen in I don't know how many years.
And back in the headlines, Jade.
Yeah, but I mean, is it safe to swim at the beaches, or is it something that should be avoided altogether, especially after a rain?
Well, I'm sure Joshua would tell you this too. It's the prudent beachgoer should know whether it's safe. There are a lot of resources out there where you can find out what water quality is at certain beaches. There's some tips you can have if you've been in San Diego. Well, you probably already know. You go to an ocean-facing beach that's open, that has a chance to have that water be diluted if there is contamination. If you're swimming during dry weather, the odds are probably pretty low, unless you're swimming near an urban runoff area, but the odds are probably pretty low that you're swimming in dirty water. But common sense and using the tools available help. But, you know, I think the question that this situation raises that needs to be answered is it acceptable to have this continual pollution problem occur? If this was all on this side of the border, this would have been done decades ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? But somehow, because the pollution originates in Mexico, this problem has lingered, and it's...
Well, all right, we're gonna have to leave it there and move on to the next topic, but we'll be watching for your stories to follow up, because it'll be very interesting to see how this suit plays out. Well, this was the week newspapers stood up for the First Amendment, the role of a free press, the foundation of democracy, and for themselves. At the urging of the Boston Globe, some 350 newspapers, large and small, published editorials defending press freedom, and that includes the San Diego Union-Tribune. It was a clear, unified response to Donald Trump's attacks, his claim that any critical story is fake news, the press is the enemy of the people, and the opposition party. True to form, Trump attacked the Globe via Twitter, but the United States Senate rebuked him. In a unanimous vote, senators passed a resolution saying simply, the press is not the enemy of the people. And Matt, kind of an amazing thing in this day and age to hear these developments this week. Tell us about your decision at the Union Tribune to get involved in this push.
Sure, but first, how stunning is it that the U.S. Congress, that the Senate has to say that?
Yeah, so we have a First Amendment, basically.
You know, I think, look, I don't know, your producers are very good, so they probably did this consciously, but we just talked about Earl McNeil. We just talked about this issue with sewage. Journalists are keeping those stories alive and keeping people talking about them, and that's where the rubber hits the road. That's one of the reasons why we decided to tee up this editorial, knowing full well that there was going to be some perils, some pitfalls, because the administration was going to say collusion. You know, the administration was going to say, here we go with 350 newspaper editorial boards around the country deciding to write similar editorials on the same day. Now, knowing full well that that was going to be the criticism that we were running into head on, I decided to address it in the editorial and say, look, these are individual people at individual outlets choosing their individual words, and every editorial board needed to decide who their audience was. I think this is an important point. You know, our audience could have been one person. It could have been the president. It could have been others. We decided that our audience was the 3 million residents of San Diego who are readers or potential readers, and anyone interested in San Diego who might look at the Union Tribune and these other newspapers and say, this is an important day. I got a ton of feedback, some people saying things that I won't repeat here on this air, so, you know, some people offering thoughtful criticism. The overwhelming majority of response that I've received has been positive. Some emails that just say 2 words, thank you.
And the LA Times got some feedback. I was reading letters column today because they, among several notable papers, decided not to do this, and were taken to task by some readers for not doing it. Robust discussion in your editorial room, right?
Yeah, it was. This wasn't just, we didn't just get this email from Marjorie Pritchett at the Globe. I got it on Wednesday morning last. I didn't just decide we're all in, we're going to do this. We had discussions over several days. I stayed late in the office on Monday and Tuesday to write this thing, and then we talked about it on the following day. And then we published it. So eventually we decided that it was worth doing. It's the right message at the right time. But you mentioned Nick Goldberg at the LA Times, John Diaz at the San Francisco Chronicle did not do editorials. They had columns, pretty insightful, pretty thoughtful columns, defending their decision not to. That's Exhibit A, why this was not an organized effort. Exactly. This was done independently.
Well, I wanted to bring up Thomas Jefferson famously said, 1787, he'd prefer newspapers without a government than a government without newspapers, only to later say, once he was president, nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper. Presidents have always tangled with the press. What's different about Trump?
That's a good question, and it's one of the criticisms we get, that this has been done dating back to the first presidents, done very loudly in the Nixon administration. This is different because of the frequency, because of the level of his criticism, because Quinnipiac University poll last week showed that 44% of the people responding to that poll believe that journalists are at greater risk of violence because of this rhetoric. You know, I'm going to leave aside what happened in Annapolis because that is not a part of this conversation. Journalists show up.
And of course, it was the shooting, 5 journalists dead in the newsroom there.
Yeah, correct. Journalists show up every day to do their work. It's poignant for us here on the border. In Mexico, journalists get killed for doing their work. But our intentions are good. And so what we decided to do at the Union Tribune is say, here's why that is. Here's how we restore trust in journalism and faith in journalism. Yeah,
that was interesting. I want to make a point. That was your headline there, how we restore faith in journalism. I mean, that implies that the president has done some damage with these constant attacks.
Yeah, and it's not just the president. Let's not give him too much credit. I mean, this has been going on for decades, kind of the systemic political attacks against the press. And let's be honest, journalists have not done themselves some favors. There have been some big mistakes that weren't acknowledged, that weren't corrected. So we own this problem ourselves. We got to dig out of it, but we got to start doing a better job of that. And I think transparency is another word for trust. And so at the Union Tribune and other outlets, we are more proactive explaining to people how we do our jobs, right? I mean, I don't know what kind of response you get on the newsroom, but
Joshua?
As I'm listening to you talk, I've been thinking about that. Like, do I feel like more people are approaching me or emailing me skeptical about the work we do? And I don't know if that's the case, to be honest. Like, I feel like our readers, sometimes they can totally be very opinionated and maybe even feel like what we said wasn't accurate, but I have a hard time really wrapping my head around whether people like trust us less. I can't say I have like an overwhelming like feeling about this, you know? I mean, you definitely hear the talking points of like the fake news being thrown about at dinner table conversations. Oh, that's fake news, whatever. But I don't know how deep it really runs. I do think about that quite a bit.
Well, here's a poll that kind of goes to that. Donald Trump has made a mockery of the adage, never argue with a man who buys ink by the barrel. We've all heard that over the years. Ipsos poll this month, 43% of Republicans agree that Trump should have the power to shut down news organizations that exhibit, quote, bad behavior.
Well, and it's not just Republicans now. I think most of the Republicans are supportive of this president across the board or by and large. But now you increasingly do see polls show kind of the opposite of what Joshua was talking about, where independents to a lesser extent and Democrats to an even lesser extent, but still significant, 1 out of 4, distrust the media for one reason or another. I think it speaks highly of you and your reporting that you're not getting that kind of blowback. But I do think to that point, I think, look, this is about individual journalists, right? Having an interaction with the public. I'm sure you guys have the same situation.
Yeah,
Jade?
Part of it is about media literacy too. What I recently came back from a convention with the National Association of Black Journalists. This was a huge topic there. And so in talking to journalists from all across the country, they're finding that a lot of readers, a lot of viewers sometimes don't know the difference between an opinion piece and a news piece, between a pundit and a reporter or an anchor. And so transparency and media literacy, I think, can help clear some of this.
Yeah. And to that point, this week the Union Tribune launched a new page on our website that defines all of these terms. I think too often we assumed
Right.
people knew what it was or didn't care even that they didn't know. We got to do better. And so we have a page up that says, here's how we handle anonymous sources, or don't, to my preference. I think the news industry uses them too much. How we edit photos and videos, how we decide what is newsworthy, and so I think this is an important thing. To your point, transparency is super important.
All right. Well, we are just about out of time, but it's a great discussion. I hope folks turn to that page you've got and turn to all the websites and read newspapers and listen to TV and radio. Certainly, we all have an interest in that. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Jade Hindman of KPBS News, Joshua Emerson Smith of the San Diego Union Tribune, Eric Anderson of KPBS, and Matt Hall of the Union Tribune. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer, and thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.